Welcome to Voices Unsing Quietly. Real where real lives are remembered, not loudly, but truthfully. There was a time when I believed being dependable was the same thing as being respected. And for a while, it even looked that way from the outside. People smiled easily when they saw me. Meetings felt warmer when I walked in, and my phone rarely stayed silent for long. I thought I had found my place simply by showing up fully, by saying yes before hesitation could form. I worked in a bright office where the windows stretched nearly from floor to ceiling. And in the afternoons, the light would soften everything it touched, turning even stressful days into something gentler. My desk sat near the middle of the room, close enough to hear laughter, but far enough that I could focus when I needed to. It became known, quietly and without announcement, that if something needed doing carefully, it would eventually find its way to me. At first, I didn't question it. Helping felt natural, and being trusted felt like its own reward. Could you look over this before I send it? Someone would ask, already placing the document beside my keyboard. You always catch what everyone else misses, so I would read it. Then there were the last-minute presentations, the forgotten scheduling conflicts, the projects no one wanted but everyone depended on once they were finished. I told myself this was what growth looked like, that competence often arrived disguised as extra effort. When people thanked me, I accepted it quietly, storing those small acknowledgments like proof that the balance was fair. Over time, though, I noticed something subtle. The requests rarely came with a question of whether I had space for them. They came with certainty. I was the one who stayed late because I could be counted on. The one who adjusted plans because I was so understanding. The one who absorbed tension so meetings could remain pleasant. Somewhere along the way, dependability had shifted into expectation, and expectation had settled into something that no longer felt optional. Still, I said yes. Not because I didn't feel the weight, but because I wasn't yet sure what would happen if I set it down. There was a rhythm to those years, predictable and steady. Mornings began with greetings that carried just enough warmth to feel genuine. Afternoons passed in quiet productivity, and evenings often lingered longer than they should have. When I finally left the building, the cleaning staff sometimes nodded to me with the familiarity of shared schedules. One night, as I packed my bag, Marta from accounting paused beside my desk and said, gently, "You know you don't always have to be the strong one." I smiled and told her I didn't mind, and at the time, I almost believed it. The first moment that unsettled that belief came during a team planning session. A large project had just landed unexpectedly, the kind that rearranged calendars and tightened everyone's shoulders. Our manager glanced around the table before his eyes rested on me. "I think you'd be perfect to coordinate this," he said, relief already softening his voice. My schedule was already full enough that I had begun measuring days by how quickly they disappeared. And for a brief second, I imagined what it might feel like to protect the small space I had left. But the room was quiet, waiting in that polite way that assumes agreement before it arrives. So I nodded. Of course, I heard myself say. The project went well, as most things did, when care was allowed the time it needed. People praised the outcome, mentioning how smoothly everything had come together, how calm the process had felt despite the pressure. Someone joked that I made difficult things look easy, and the table laughed softly in agreement. I laughed too, though something inside me had begun asking a question I wasn't ready to answer. When did easy become invisible? Weeks later, another request came, this one smaller but arriving at the worst possible moment. My father had not been sleeping well, and late-night phone calls had begun threading worry through my mornings. "Could you stay a little longer tonight?" a colleague asked, hovering near my desk. "You explain things so clearly, and the client really responds to you." The sentence was kind, but it carried that familiar certainty again. For the first time, I felt the word "no" form fully before I softened it. "I can't tonight," I said gently. "I need to leave on time." There was a pause, brief but noticeable, like a note held just longer than expected. "Oh," she replied, recovering quickly. "Of course, I'll figure something out." She smiled, yet something had shifted, not dramatically, not unkindly, but enough that I felt it as I walked to the elevator. The doors closed with their usual quiet efficiency, and in the mirrored reflection, I studied my face, half expecting it to look different, simply because I had chosen myself for once. But the air around me felt newly honest. After that evening, I began noticing how often my agreement had been assumed rather than requested. It appeared in the way people approached my desk, already mid-sentence, in how tasks were assigned with gratitude before I had spoken, in the gentle surprise that followed whenever I hesitated. I wasn't angry. If anything, I felt awake. There was a meeting not long after where the conversation drifted toward weekend coverage for an upcoming event. My name surfaced almost immediately, offered with the confidence of habit. Before anyone could finalize it, I said quietly, "I won't be available that weekend." No explanation followed, because I was learning that boundaries don't always require stories. The silence that settled wasn't heavy, only unfamiliar. Someone else volunteered after a moment, and the discussion continued. Though I sensed a recalibration happening in real time, like furniture being shifted slightly to accommodate a new shape in the room. Later, A coworker stopped by and asked, half teasing, "Are you learning to say no now?" I smiled. "I'm learning to listen," I answered. What surprised me most was not the reaction of others, but the conversation unfolding inside myself. For years, I had believed that being liked and being needed were reflections of the same thing. Yet, the more I protected my time, the more I saw the difference. Being liked is often effortless when you are endlessly available. Being respected sometimes begins the moment you are not. There was one afternoon that remains especially clear in my memory. Rain pressed softly against the windows, turning the city into a blur of silver lines, and the office carried that hushed focus that weather sometimes brings. A colleague approached with a stack of folders, her expression hopeful. "I know you're the best at smoothing things out," she began, "and this situation is delicate." I listened, feeling the familiar pull to step forward, to resolve, to steady. For a moment, the old reflex stirred the quiet temptation to keep harmony at any personal cost. Then I noticed something else beneath it. Tiredness, yes, but also clarity. "I think someone else should handle this one," I said calmly. "I trust the team can manage it together." She looked surprised, though not offended, and after a brief pause, she nodded. "You're right," she admitted. "We probably rely on you too much." Her honesty felt like a window opening. As the months passed, the atmosphere around me changed in ways both subtle and meaningful. Some people stopped asking for quite so much, while others began asking more thoughtfully, leaving space for my answer rather than stepping past it. A few relationships cooled, though not harshly. They simply revealed that what connected us had been convenience more than understanding. Yet other relationships deepened, strengthened by a mutual recognition that care flows best when it moves in both directions. I began leaving work with daylight still lingering, rediscovering evenings that belonged entirely to me. I returned to long walks without destination, to dinners that weren't rushed, to phone calls with friends that stretched comfortably into laughter. Nothing about my competence diminished. If anything, it sharpened. One morning, our team gathered to review a project that had required contributions from many hands. As the discussion unfolded, I noticed how naturally responsibilities had been distributed, how no single person carried the entire emotional weight. Near the end, our manager looked at me and said, with a sincerity that felt unpracticed, "You've helped us become more balanced, even when you stepped back." The words stayed with me long after the meeting ended. It is a quiet kind of influence, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but reshapes a space all the same. Looking back now, I understand that people hadn't liked me only because I said yes. Many of them simply hadn't realized there was another way to know me, because I had never shown it. When I finally allowed my no to exist beside my kindness, something steadier emerged. Not distance, definition. There is a misconception that boundaries push others away. Yet, what I discovered was almost the opposite. Boundaries invited people to meet me where I actually stood, rather than where endless accommodation had placed me. And those who remained did so with clearer eyes. One evening, as I prepared to leave, the office nearly empty and the sky already deepening into blue, Marta passed again by my desk. She studied me for a moment before smiling softly. "You seem lighter," she said. "I think I am," I replied. Outside, the air carried that early hint of autumn, cool enough to wake the senses, but gentle enough to welcome. I realized then that usefulness is a beautiful thing when it is chosen freely, but it becomes something else entirely when it is the price of belonging. For a long time, I believed approval was something I had to earn repeatedly, as though it might disappear if I ever paused. Now I see that the right spaces do not withdraw warmth simply because you protect your own energy. They adjust. So when I think about those earlier years, I don't feel regret. I feel gratitude for the version of myself who cared so deeply, and equal gratitude for the one who learned that care must include the self as well. People did like me when I always agreed, but they learned to respect me when I finally said no. And in that respect, I found something quieter than approval, yet far more lasting. I found room to breathe. This was voices unseen quietly re-land. If you'd like to hear more stories like this in the future, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a quiet place to listen.